plans.
Hello and welcome to the November 1st policy meeting of the Lower Merion School District. Just a FYI that this meeting will be recorded or is being recorded, and if you want to speak for community members, you'll be able to put your message into a chat if you're online, and if you're in person, please come to the podium and just state your name and where you live in the district. And we are not going to be limiting it to 3 minutes this month or this month's meeting, but if you just can stay around that time so everybody has a chance to speak. If there is many that want to discuss the topic of the moment. And so I will then pass the meeting over to Megan, who will start with our first item on the agenda.
Thank you, Melanie. This may be the smallest packet I've ever had in policy. I just saying for the record.
A plus.
But I'm also sad. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm underperforming because of that. So next time, don't worry, I'll compensate. Thank you. Quality over quantity, right? I also just wanted to share the sort of vision for the next couple meetings too, because of we're wrapping up, and this is sort of traditional, my experience in doing this work for a long time. Sometimes you get to a conclusion point of looking at a few policies pretty intensely, and then we reset and start looking at another set of policies. And so I feel like that's where we're coming to right now. And in terms of our timeline, we have what we have today on the agenda. And we also are looking forward to diving into some more robust policies, such as our individualized student supports and services, behavior support, student activities that I think will benefit from a little more time and a little more engagement. We've been working with the Committee for Special Education about some opportunities that we can provide some learning in our community as these policies move forward. So there's some context available for that. So I'd like to recommend, depending on where we end today, but that we forego a December meeting and restart again in January with the list that is under discussion, future discussion, but we can revisit that at the end with any questions that you have. But I just wanted to note that we also don't have any policies or ARs that must go for approval from a legal standpoint at this point in time. So there's not an urgency to move forward with anything in December as well. So I wanted to provide that context as we got started, so you can be thinking about that as we do our work today. At the top of our agenda, which is the proposed for adoption of the equity policy and then its related administrative regulation, we last left the discussion with the change of moving the defined terms from the policy. We took the step in the policy to note that we were moving the defined terms, as well as bolding words within the policy that are defined within the administrative regulation. So this is another step in the, sort of evolution of this work. And to that end, the other thing that was added since we last met, none of this, that movement we talked about last time. The thing that we added since we last met was on page 9, the reference to disability or student with a disability. Even though it was cross-referenced before, we added that cross-reference there. We didn't want to embed the entire definition, just because when you have defined terms in multiple places in policy, we don't want to, inadvertently make one revision that's inconsistent with the other. So we made it more explicit that term is cross-referenced in the other policy. And to the extent we're able to hyperlink these terms, we will work to do that as well, because I know that came up as a question the last time. So that was the change in structure and in the addition from our last meeting that I wanted to bring to your attention.
Thank you. I appreciate you adding the disability part. Is there any questions from the committee?
I have one. Okay. Just to clarify, for the, when we talk about the accompanying regulation, can we put the name of it, like parenthetically, and link it or
Yes.
something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
That's, I apologize.
That's
I think
okay.
you mentioned that the last time. We can absolutely do that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? In general, administrative regulations, the administrative regulations that applies to a certain policy, the number is the same, right? It's just you swap AR for the beginning?
Correct. So in this case, like linking it may be the most efficient way to do that. So, but we do.
And that
The
was,
name is still helpful.
yeah, no,
You may not know.
that wasn't a dig in any way. I've been on this board for 5 years, and I have actually never served on the policy committee. I'm just coming for fun. And so that was actually a clarifying question that I thought was the case, but wasn't 100% sure. And so wanted to bring it up because it's helpful information for all of us. And just put that like the shooting star with the rainbow, the more you know.
We're going to give you a musical tagline on that one. So was there a reason why we just didn't stick with, page 9, top right 9, when we do disability or student with disability, was there a reason why we just didn't lead with student with a disability with person first language? So like, is it defined in other pieces as just talking about the disability, or is it?
So the reason I
Yeah.
did it that way, I appreciate that, but I thought when someone was looking for that term when it's listed in this order, they might look for disability first. So if I put student, comma, or disability, comma, student with, I don't know. I just thought if someone's looking for that defined term in a list that's in alphabetical order. Yeah, absolutely.
The comment, this was based upon a comment that came from the community too last month. And they specifically said disability. So thinking from a community perspective, I agree with what Megan's saying, that they'll think disability, look for disability, and then student with a disability having both, which is the person first.
I'd like to think through that, because just because people use terms and don't have the exposure to understand how these language are changing, doesn't mean we use antiquated terms. So I wonder, like, can you do it without I understand it's by alphabetical, but if it goes student with a disability, parentheses, disability, and somebody searches it, it will be able to be tagged based on that search. And again, if our goal is to use student first language, which we know puts people in the disability community, it is the best practice. We should go with best practices and help people find it, and then connect to the exposure of understanding, why are they doing this? Oh, this is why we're doing it. Still get to where you are, but you're using best practices around the community.
Oh, you're talking well, I don't know what the best practices are.
Person first language.
Well, I know it is
Yeah,
person first language. That's what typically I'm always correcting people with that. But I see what you're saying, and so you're thinking that we should just move this with student with a disability down to S, would you say, or leave it at D with student with a disability, right where it is.
I think, sorry. If you lead with student with a disability and then parentheses disability, I think it will give you the opportunity, if you want to put it out like in the alphabetical order where D is up higher. I don't know if it matters, but I think that is really just signaling we're using person first language, but we're also making sure you understand what we're talking about here. So we're using multiple language inputs to get to the same point. Does that make sense?
Is this what you're trying? Yeah,
Yeah, yes.
yeah. I'm fine with it. Oh, this is AR. We don't have to approve it, but I'm okay.
That makes sense.
So noted. It does. We can certainly work through that. I agree with I agree with both. So we'll, yes. So we can make that change and see whether there's a way to make sure that it's identifiable for those that are searching for it.
I'm going to say grammatical and respectful.
Yes.
So are we good to move the policy forward for approval at our next meeting? Board meeting?
You gotta ask Abby. You and she are the only two that get
Oh,
to
yes,
vote in this.
sorry.
No, I'm officially
get
on
to vote?
Before
Yeah,
we start
thanks.
public comment, any comment? No. Anything online?
We do have one comment on the chat from Kara Herman, president of the CSE. She says, "Thank you for including the definition of disability and for offering to hyperlink to the full language. I appreciate what Dr. Sautner is saying about person-first language, too."
Okay. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Karen. That helps too.
Okay, so now,
I have a question, actually.
Okay.
It doesn't really interrupt this, but when would an AR be up for discussion as well? So like, does it usually go hand in hand that when we discuss a policy, we discuss the AR? How does that work?
Typically, yes, when we look at a policy, we look at the administrative regulation, but there are times, and there's an example today where we look separately at an AR, so it doesn't always have to go hand in hand. So it sort of depends on what the need is and what the update is, yeah.
so now are we,
Do you want to clarify why I'm here first?
oh, yes, yes, and I'd like to clarify, welcome Curry, who is now a member, an official member of the, where are we today? Policy meeting. I know, I don't know why I was, because you and I used to be on curriculum together. Yeah, the gang is that. And appreciate, and so she will be including, voting on these as today's agenda items as well.
Do you mind if I take one beat on that? And I'll do this in every meeting. So real quick, the president of the school board, no matter who the president is, can always step into a committee meeting if there needs to be a quorum and needs to have an extra vote. But what we've moved forward in the last month is that I will be an active voting member of the curriculum, the policy, the equity, and the finance committee, which is something we grappled with about a year ago, and now we're putting it into play, just to ensure we have more voices at the table before we go to the board, the whole board. Got it. Thank you. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. And thank you, Shayna, for joining us today. We appreciate being here.
Yes, I can't vote because I'm not on this committee, but it's just,
We like your
so
voice.
fun, and I know you love to hear me talk.
Okay, now I will do this once more. Can we move this forward?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Okay. Okay, thank you, everybody. So back to you, Megan, for the next item.
Right. Next on our agenda, and Shana, this is the committee that's the most exciting of them all, just by the way, so maybe you'll come back to the next.
I mean, we're having our reorg meeting next month. Maybe I'll put in my dibs to get reassigned to this committee.
It is. The next on our agenda is a first reading. I'd ask Ken, our solicitor's office, what recommendations they had to move any policy forward that might need some cleanup or attention. And the revisions, proposed revisions reflected here are being recommended by our solicitor's office. So Ken, can you explain?
Sure. I don't know how to say this any better than the policy you have now and the AR are kind of clunky, and they're not, I don't think, very clear. We've had occasion to review this thoroughly in other districts, and we have come up with a model policy here I think that's much easier to read and understand. The policy is basically saying we're going to follow the law, and the regulation tries to very clearly differentiate between what the rights are of students, employees, and visitors, because the rules and requirements aren't quite the same for each. They're slightly different for each. Students, it's generally it's either IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, or it's the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. For employees, it's generally the Americans with Disabilities Act, and visitors, it's also ADA, but or Americans with Disabilities Act, but it's also some variations. It's more about the rules for visitors are different than they are for employees.
So, just to understand this, this is saying basically any service animal that would be acceptable for walking into, say, a restaurant or a store in the mall would be acceptable to come in here because that is the law. If I had a seeing eye dog, if I had a hearing alert dog, if I had a seizure alert dog, a blood sugar alert dog, if I was diabetic, that kind of thing, that would be something we would let in. But a dog that was perhaps untrained and I had gone online and purchased a service animal vest from Amazon for $15 because it makes me feel better to have my dog in class, that would be not allowed?
Okay, let me unpack that. You started off with visitor, and then you sort of, at the end, kind of transitioned to student.
Did I say visitor?
Well, you
Wow.
said if you walked into a restaurant with I assumed you meant somebody coming into.
No, I was trying to draw a parallel. If I was a student, if I was a student or a teacher, and I had, say, a dog that, so there are dogs that can smell when a diabetic person, their blood sugar is going to spike or go real low. And that is not what we think of. Well, I know a lot of people think of guide dogs specifically as seeing eye dogs, which I think everyone would kind of accept that if we had a student with visual impairment that had a trained seeing eye dog, that would not be something that would be tricky under this. But if we had, if we had an alert dog for some other kind of physical issue that had gone through a training program and was certified and was with a handler, that they would be afforded the same rights in school with that animal as they would if they went to any other public business. That was what I was trying to ask.
Okay, well, for students, it's actually, you're going to see the most, well, I'll say due diligence in the way of determining what the nature of the needs are and what the skill set of the service animal is. So no, you're not going to be able to purchase a vest online and say, okay, I'm here for my first day of school with this animal. There's going to need to be a decision made by either an IEP team or a Section 504 team. They will, review the student's particular needs, and they, as I said, and they will make a determination as to whether the service animal is necessary for that student either to receive a free and appropriate public education or whether it's necessary for that student to be able to access their education. There are other rules that may come into play. For example, there may be situations where if the particular animal creates a danger to the health, welfare, and safety of other students, there may need to be other adjustments made. For example, if other students have, particular allergies or things like that. But those things are all worked out, they're accommodated, they're all spelled out in either an IEP or a 504 plan, so you have that. Where I thought you were going with your question was you're a visitor to school and you take an adult, you're able to take your service animal into a restaurant or whatever. Does that mean you can take them onto school property? And the answer is you need to be able to actually demonstrate, there needs to actually be a service animal. And there's only a limited
There's
number of questions.
2 questions you can ask.
Yeah.
Is this a trained service animal and what tasks is it trained to perform?
Correct, and that's what the regulation actually specifically says.
Okay,
about
so
visitors.
if I had a trained service animal, it could do that?
Is this animal required because of a disability? What work or task has the animal been trained to perform?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you do not have the right to ask that in a public space.
Oh,
You
no.
do have a right to ask that in a school space. That's the difference.
Correct.
So just to, because it's confusing, it feels easy to say this is what happens in a museum and this is what happens in school, but you're not allowed to actually do that in a public space unless there is a threat from the animal. You can do that in a school space. So that's what makes these, that the animal's certified. And I just wonder if we should put that word in there.
Well, we don't. We say
great.
staff are not allowed to request
Could
documentation
not
for
find
the
it,
animal.
sorry. But yeah, so it is different. So I don't want to create a misconception and confuse this. It is very different in school, and rightfully so. But I just wanted to clarify that.
Correct, and that's actually why we're revising this, to make it very clear that the rules that apply to students aren't the same as the rules that apply to employees, aren't the same as the rules that apply to visitors.
And so there would also be a process for evaluating whether a staff member was entitled to their
Correct.
service animal.
That's usually done by what's called in Americans with Disabilities Act interactive conference that you're required to have. And anytime as you become aware or that an employee might need an accommodation or an employee requests one.
Yeah, I just wonder if required is part of the language. I haven't, it's honestly hard for me to read with all this red type. My brain kind of goes a little fuzzy, but I get a little squicky with the word required because there's things like say with my example of a diabetic alert dog, there are other ways to alert to sugar levels spiking or not. And so someone could say there are other tools. Is that animal required? But I feel very nervous about telling someone who has a disability that my estimation of what they need to manage their health is more important than the tools that they've developed to do that.
Understandable, but, you know, there are, as you, I think are aware, there are numerous procedural safeguards in place for students with special needs. So there is a, you know, opportunity for, first of all, it has to be a group decision. It can't just be one person's decision. And that decision, if the family is not satisfied with it, they have the ability to ask for pre-hearing conference, mediation, due process hearing. So there are a lot of procedural safeguards in place in that situation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are they also working with listening to outside therapists and doctors and things that the student may advocate on their behalf?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I have a kind of a recommendation after this discussion, because as you said, you know, the rules apply differently to different folks, like students, employees, and visitors. Could we have a sentence that is that explicit that says that students and staff and visitors, you know, the rules apply differently to each, so that it doesn't sort of seem like this is an umbrella policy for everybody who might, you know, just to be super explicit.
Yeah, I like that, under where that heading service animals is, like the following paragraphs explain the differences for different roles, and then in the school setting. Yeah.
apply it, and then like it's not the same.
Well, that's why I think it's probably helpful, because like you said, you know, if you're in a museum or you're in a restaurant or some, you know, we want to make it very clear that these rules apply here to these people because they're here, not because they are the rules that apply in anybody's world.
Yeah, it's time, place, and manner. It applies to the setting, not just the person. And sometimes people, like, that is my right. So when I take that right everywhere, and it's different depending on settings, as we all know when we go through TSA.
Okay, so we can put that at the beginning of the administrative regulation?
Or potentially, right, where we start talking about the differences, but either way, we'll figure out a place,
Yeah.
but I think it's a good recommendation.
Yeah, for the AR. It'll go in the AR, though. We don't need to change the policy.
I guess, is that is it worth saying, like, a line in the policy, like the AR will articulate the different rights associated with the following groups in the school setting, and so it signals that there are going to be, there's differentiation that the board sort of recognizes?
I mean, my thought was, I think at the risk of like being over explanatory, I'm assuming that someone who would be reviewing this would be reviewing it in the service of wanting to understand how or when they could have a service animal, or when they could, you know, allow for one. So I would say, yeah, having it really clear from the beginning and then also in the AR, I don't know, I think it would be helpful in that way.
All right, how is this then? Under delegation of responsibility, superintendent or designee shall develop regulations and procedures to accommodate students, employees, and visitors with disabilities?
I think it's good to make that more specific, but I would say something like students, staff, and visitor, I'm sorry, what you just said went out of my ear, but as the rules that apply differ between each or among each, or something, so that it's clear that not everyone has the same rule. Because I think that's kind of the gist.
Okay, so something, these regulations, then add a sentence, and these regulations shall explain in detail the differences in the nature of accommodations available, whether the individual is a student, employee or visitor,
To the district, maybe to even clarify.
or visitor to the district. To the district, capital D district. Okay?
I feel like we're going to get revoked. I want to go back to what Melanie said. And the question was around like medical advice. And I know that is always really strong in a 504, but sometimes with outside evaluators, it's not always strong in the IEP because we have our own internal evaluation system at the district. So that's just a clarifying question, less about so I'm going to look at you and not you anymore, less about the policy, but are we layering in the expert recommendation? And again, back to Shayna's question, like I have a little concern about saying, oh, we can use a different tool to ensure that your blood sugar is regulated. And what is that process? Because in 504, it's really clear. In IEP, it gets a little grayer for me, and I want to understand that. So it was really their fault that I came back to this.
I think, you know, as Ken noted, and as, you know, by practice and by law, it is a team-oriented decision, and when there's expertise, there's, you know, an understanding about, like, deferring to experts and making that decision on a case-by-case basis. So I don't, did you want to, you're
Yes,
nodding.
well, the typically, the disability classification here would be other health impaired, and other health impaired generally does require consideration of outside medical, because that is, the other health impairments aren't something the district necessarily is staffed to really be able to address and evaluate.
So where would a psychiatrist fall under that? Because I could see this as an emotional support animal. And that feels a little gray to me of where it would fall, because then the school at times has said something like, well, our psychologist will analyze that. And that, again, when it's clearly a medical, like, measurement of blood, it feels clean and clear. When it is a tool that the school has on their team, so an evaluator or a psychologist or psychiatrist, that's where I get a little gray. Are we using the expertise of people in the field that are experts in the field when it comes to this crossover area?
I don't believe you have psychiatrists on staff. You have access to outside consultants.
Correct.
As psychiatrists, right. All I can say is the law requires the district to consider outside medical information supplied by the parent. There's not a requirement that the district automatically defer to it, but there is a requirement that they consider it.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
Yeah, because it does, and if I'm looking in the definitions, it does call out that the animal needs to be trained to perform tasks. And then it also says that it can't be an animal whose sole function is to function as emotional support. So I think if that is often the issue, that it would be considered in two different ways, somebody who just wants an animal because it makes them feel more secure, rather than someone who went and had a psychiatric assistance dog that went and got trained. And I mean, this is just my hunch that, and I can't speak for anybody because I've been there, I was just speaking to the two different types of ways that it could present, that in an IEP meeting, people looking at a dog that had gone through a certified training, even for a psychiatric issue, rather than a dog that someone just said was my emotional support animal, even if their therapist or whatever said, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, I just want to I know certification is needed, and that's like a threshold with the animals. It's certification. That's what makes the big difference. Regardless of what the human needs and supports, there's a training level. But I think when we parse out medical as only chemical.
Absolutely.
I have a
agree
problem
with
with
you.
that. Yeah, that's where I'm feeling like, ooh, why are we saying one medical is not okay when the other medical is? So I just want to, I'm not saying we're doing that. That's where I'm getting a little squirrely.
Yeah. And psychiatrists go to medical school too.
And I think, I wonder if the answer to this doesn't lie in this policy, but when we look at individualized supports and services, that can be, you know, like a little more of a broader view of that, and then we can maybe bring it back for conversation in that context as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay, okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought we were. I was going to summarize where we ended up.
Oh, I still have a couple of questions myself.
We're not done yet.
All right,
Okay.
bring it on.
All right. I'm looking at students with disability in conjunction or, with use of service animals by students, and I feel like there's a little bit of, I'm on page 22 to page 24. And this is kind of giving one set of instructions that implies that you send it to the principal, but when you get over here, it says you're supposed to send it to the Director of Student Services. I'm wondering in this definition if we need to reference this use of service animals by a student, so it clarifies this is the procedure you will use when you put a request in for a service animal. The principal shall, in consultation with the student's IEP team. So it doesn't say that you submit it to them, but when you read that, you kind of, in my mind, would go, oh, so the principal needs to be the one, I need to submit it to the IEP team and the principal. But then when we get it over to page 24, it says, parent guardian must submit a written request to the Director of Student Services and Special Education for their child. So, I think we're kind of giving directions in two different areas. And I think if we just put a reference to in accordance with use of service animals by students after the first would clarify it.
Ken, was there a specific reason there was a difference there? Because I think that's something internally we can address and then bring it back next time to just make sure we're, because I agree that's yeah. If it's not, I mean, there might be a bridge that we're missing here, but that probably should be consistent. And I'll make sure we identify the consistent.
I think we can merge those two sections. I don't think we need number one first of all. I think we take number two and add it. I think we can merge the use of service animals by students into the section where it says students with disabilities.
But then there's a separate area for use of service animals by staff
Or we can move,
and procedures applicable to visitors.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like,
Each of them are kind of aligned the same way.
I think we can take all three, I think we can take those three under service animals, student employees, visitors. I think we can take those three and just merge them into the three sections of the use of. I think that's, I know why it was done this way elsewhere, but I think for here, it makes more sense to merge them.
Okay. And just a couple of general questions. When we're looking at the definitions for service animals and therapy dogs, did we take that from a specific area that aligns with I'm assuming it came from some sort of state reg, is it state regs or fed regs that the definitions come from?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I think service, sorry?
Can we hyperlink?
Oh, sure.
Sorry. As long as, again, we love a hyperlink. If we can, it's always good to like show the hierarchy of how we're following it, because PA sets different standards than other states. So I think if we go with PA definition, great, let's just show that we're connecting the dots there too. When it's
So adding a legal citation. Adding a legal citation. Yeah.
Well, the hyperlink also, if it changes, it gives the ability to say, well, it's been updated. It happens in real time.
Okay. Okay, and then my last one, I promise. I'm wondering, on page 23, and it says, what work or task has the animal been trained to perform? It says, staff are not allowed to request any documentation for the animal required that the animal demonstrates its task. So this is, I'm assuming, once an animal has been approved,
I'm sorry, what page?
page 23. So this is post-approval process, approval, or is this
yeah,
part of the
that's-
approval process? When-
That's really for visitors. That applies mostly to the visit. I'm going to put that under the visitor section because that really wouldn't. Yeah,
But it's like a separate, it doesn't.
Yeah, determination,
no, that should
yeah, the way.
clearly only applies to visitors.
Yeah, you can't tell that I didn't realize it applied only to visitors. I was thinking.
As a practical matter, it only applies to
Yeah.
visitors because you're going to answer those two questions as part of the ADA process, the IP process, or the 504 process
Yeah.
inherently.
Yeah, that's what I was confused about.
Yeah.
I would have thought it would have already been approved.
No, that's just visitors.
Okay. Great.
Can I ask a 100% non-related question, but related to policy? Next time we do these packets, can we make the two different colors of red, a red and something else? Because I just cannot parse what is new and what is different. Like, I'm looking at this and my brain just
The red,
absolutely
the different shades of red are just, I think, a function of the printer. That's not, because everything is new, everything that's in red is new language. The difference is a printer. So, we can
Never
talk
mind.
about maybe a
No,
different color.
there's definitely like different edits. That's a version edit, one or two. I see the two different reds you're talking
Yes.
about, but it doesn't matter. Because what you're saying is that in general, all the red is change.
Yes,
This is a complete overhaul though, so.
yeah,
No, that's totally fine.
so
That's,
we can clarify that.
Okay,
Or
sorry
maybe
to-
use blue or something, I don't know.
good, that's great. Sorry to derail our conversation.
No, that's fine. Are we done with our questions here?
Can I also add another point?
Oh, yes.
Sometimes what we do.
Okay.
No, I just like, from a user, I'm always thinking about the end user.
Yeah,
So,
appreciate
sometimes what we do when we have a lot of, revisions is that we, print a clean copy as well, so you can read through it and then go back, so we'll try to remember.
I would, yeah, I would
know,
appreciate it.
we had plenty of paper to burn.
I know it's so hard because like we use bold actually in the text that usually my brain would say, okay, make the new stuff bold, but I understand that there's like actual conventions on how we do this. And I appreciate just that you're thinking about it and that it is the Friday morning after Halloween and my brain reading in red just didn't work.
And another convention you'll see sometimes, if we're like, say you revise a policy at one meeting and then you meet new revisions, we'll highlight like the latest revisions. We'll go, here's the red line compared to the original, but here's the highlighted changes that you made to the proposed original version. So we do try to point out the revisions to the revisions.
That's great. It's like college with all my different colored highlighters, so I know what was in lecture and what was in my reading.
You just sound way too organized. Okay, so I'm okay to move on to community comments? Yeah. Anything in chat?
Yes, we have one community comment from Robin Gowrie, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, of Bryn Mawr. How many students and staff use service animals?
Do we know that?
I don't presently have that number. It fluctuates from time to time. It would be something I have to do some research on. It's not a big number, no.
Actually, that just reminds me of one question I forgot to ask is there was talk about allergies in the classroom. When you say that the animal is removed to another location, does that mean the student goes with the animal or?
It's really fact specific.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's really hard to say what would happen in a particular case.
I'd imagine it would be more likely that they would rearrange
Well,
what child is in what class, and they would switch what sections those children are in to separate.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but that's why I was trying to get clarification, exactly what does it mean?
I have no idea. That's a question for,
So it'd be on a
Kimberly
case-by-case
Fraser, yeah.
basis, and it would be.
So next time when we discuss this, we'll make sure that we have Kimberly Fraser in our meeting to answer all these questions.
Certainly, and that's the beauty of policy. We bring it back for a second reading, which is now referred to as proposed for adoption. So we will see this again in January likely. So
I have a question, but sort of after that person's question is, what, was there a recent change in regulation that made us want to review this, or what brought it to the table?
nothing other than this policy, as I said, and this is something that we do from time to time. If we see something, we do something for another district, another district client, and we, go through it and they do all the legwork, and we will sometimes give it off, suggest it to other clients that have the same outdated policies. And I just reviewed this
Shopping in your
one.
closet.
Say that again?
Shopping in your closet.
Yes, that's exactly,
great way to-
exactly right.
But, and I'd also say that even though it's not a frequent issue that arises here, the clunkiness is real to us in terms of like where does this actually fit and who has what rights? So this does streamline it more in a way that will be helpful as we communicate to, in those situations, what the expectations are.
This one seems like it needs a flow chart.
So
More pictures of dogs.
it's like shopping in your friend's closet, to like get the analogy right. But the PA regulations changed on this, what, like 5 years ago, right before COVID? Because that's when, there's a lot of organizations in the area that do this work to make things accessible. Person first language, all of that. Outreach is a huge one that's fantastic at that, nationally recognized. But I feel like it was 5 years ago when things started to change in the public sphere in PA.
Correct. And I think it was like 2018, because that's when this policy was last looked at.
Okay, so is there any from community members here who are in the audience would like to speak to this? No. Okay,
I will make the changes to the policy that you asked for, and we will do the reorganization of the regulation. Bring
okay,
it back.
okay. And we're good to move.
This can go to first reading, then
Okay.
in November. It'll then stay as a repeat first reading in December, and then January, it could be hopefully ready for adoption.
Well, we're not having, if we're not going to have a meeting in December, will that be in January will be when it goes for the second first reading?
Maybe I thought that's what I said, but I guess maybe not. Okay, so November, first reading, December, repeat for,
Yeah.
you don't have a December board.
You're talking about at the board
Oh,
meeting.
I'm sorry, board meetings. November, board meeting, first reading. December, board meeting, repeat first reading.
Oh.
January, board meeting, adoption.
Now that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, okay, sorry
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we're good to move forward as can we? Okay.
Aye.
Aye. Oh, you just need to nod. Okay, next, back to you, Megan.
Next on the agenda is administrative regulation, assignment of students within the district. This administrative regulation was originally developed, was it back in 2016, not long ago, relating to what's been known or called our partner school program. And largely, it had been implemented at the elementary level and at a time when we were experiencing a lot of enrollment growth. And we put into place this regulation that allowed for the superintendent or designee to identify classes or sections within a school that were already at capacity as measured by the class size guidelines that we have in place, that rather than staffing a new classroom because of the facility pressures of doing that or the cost associated with doing that, that the 1 to 2 students that it might impact would be partner schooled to another elementary school. We provide the transportation, et cetera. So we've been doing that for, since 2016 at the elementary level. Last year, in noticing some of those same types of enrollment pressures at our secondary level, in particular at our high school level, we incorporated the language of secondary school. So if you look at, on page 34, for the purposes of this regulation, where it says under the first paragraphs that are identified 1 and 2, we added or secondary school to those definitions. Homeschool means an elementary or secondary school, and partner school means an elementary or secondary school. Along with this, we put into place guidelines every year around how do we operationalize that. Last year, we began instituting a partner school plan at the high school level, following the choice selection process that we've historically had in place at the middle school level. so that new families that were registering a student to enroll at the high school level would be partner schooled to Harriton. So that was in early spring that started to happen. At the same time, when we got those choice numbers in, as well as looking at the class that was graduating, we knew that we didn't need to actually institute that plan at that time. We could allow for our new registrants to begin registering to the zones in which they lived. So what we referred to as paused that partner school plan. Then later in the spring, as we continued to monitor those enrollments, we made the decision, effective, I believe, around June 15th, to reinstitute that partner school plan at the high school level. So that impacted, of course, that impacted approximately 50 to 60 families, and continues to, because that's presently what's happening. So any family that registers at the high school level currently is being partner schooled to Harriton. When they're partner schooled to Harriton, they're provided transportation, and we really do look to support those families that are transitioning in at any time, and certainly through this process. That's been a feature of how we've tried to do partner schooling since it was instituted at the elementary level. So fast forward, here we are, we're taking inventory of the impact of that partner schooling plan, because it was just, this is the first year and we're still living into it, knowing that if we were to continue it, that traditional selection process at the middle school would be compromised and would likely cause the unintended impact of having Harriton grow in a way that's going to not be manageable or need to be managed by substantial investment in facilities and staffing. So we're really trying to keep that careful balance of partner schooling and maintaining enrollment in a way that serves our students best, serves our district best, and serves, from a fiduciary standpoint, the budget, et cetera. So we are in the moment evaluating that, and we are going to bring that back in December to the full board to say this is the recommendation for the partner school plan for next year, knowing that it has various impacts on families, but the likelihood is that selection process that happens at the middle school level will continue to happen as it does currently, because of the impact would be too great to do moving forward. So I say that we're in the midst of working on that, and that we will bring that forward for board review conversation at the December meeting. So there's nothing to change here. I just wanted to highlight where that partner schooling process lived.
I just, two clarifying questions. One, it's not just the middle school, it's the high school though, too. High school level. Partner.
Correct.
Yes, I just want to be clear, because I know there's choice with the middle school, but there's also choice with high school. In certain parts of Narberth, you can pick which one you go to.
If you're newly enrolled, yes.
No, if certain sections of Narberth, the kids have traditionally always, like the block I lived on, you were always able to pick which high school.
And that's usually happening 8th to 9th grade.
Yeah,
Yes.
So that's still the same. It's only if you're new to the district, even though you may have lived there for 10 years. So you were in like a private school.
Correct.
Clarifies everything. Thank you.
I have a question also. Is it, I don't know if it would be helpful or not, but in my reading it, I'm wondering if it would be to clarify when the assignments would be sent out, like, you would be notified by a certain time, just so that people are aware. I don't know if that would be too discretionary, that we don't want to prescribe the time, but.
Yeah, the partner school assignments are what happens typically is in the summertime with the partner school assignments, we try to wait as long as possible, because we ideally want to place students in their home school. And sometimes you don't know if a family's moved, so we kind of monitor that really closely. I know that does create like some level of anxiety, but I also know from experience, when you place someone outside of their partner school or to a partner school, they kind of get invested there. And when you say, oh, a spot opened up at your home school, they're like, I don't want to go back now. And that creates a transportation issue. So we try to manage it and know that that's a real thing, how families are feeling about it. So we acknowledge it, but we do, I mean, LaToya's wonderful in connecting with families and our registration office to kind of give them the reassurance, like, we're trying to get you in your home school if that's possible, and sometimes it isn't. So that's why I wouldn't put a specific timeline on it.
I have questions not related to the policy, but related to partner schooling. Is now the appropriate time to ask them, or should I send you an email with that?
I'm happy to ask.
They're
if you wanna
questions
ask
that you can answer pretty quickly. So when you're assigning to the homeschool versus the partner school, it's a first come, first serve. So if you register your child early, you're more likely to get into your homeschool rather than be partner schooled.
Yes.
Okay. Is there sibling parity? So if my first child is partner schooled and then my second child, and they would decide to stay in that school as my second child wants to go to the same school, can my second child go there so I have two kids? Or is it just if there's room, you go to your home school, even if you split your family?
Okay. I would, so going back to the first answer, if you have a child already in the school, please enroll your child your second child as soon as possible to make, to get in line. But
So-
if we do get in a situation where there's a partner schooling situation where we partner school a sibling or two siblings are registering at once, we do often offer the opportunity for that sibling
That's great.
to join them.
Okay,
So
and
that
so,
there aren't split family situations.
sorry, Hugo.
Most of the time that works.
And so if my kid gets partner schooled for 1 year and then there's room at the homeschool the next year, do they have to move back, or are they allowed to stay in their partner school that they've established in?
What we have typically done, especially with younger grades, to say kindergarten, for example, kindergarten is a 1-year partner school experience because class sizes change over years. So we typically move those students back and we tell families that's what's going to happen. But if it's a third grader going into fourth grade, most families, our experience is they want to stay in the partner school anyway. And we also try, even though it's harder now with 3 middle schools, we try to align the partner school with the feeder pattern.
Oh, that's
So they're-
fantastic.
Yeah, so when it was 3 going into 1, it was easier than 2, but that really is a priority for us to keep students within that same feeder pattern.
All right, and so this is one, and maybe I should look to Mr. Weinstein, and this is a thing we could talk about in curriculum one time, is how the middle school selection and high school selection processes work if you're not going to your actual zone school, zone school is what we called it when I was a kid. It's breaking my brain. Okay, so that might be a thing, because I know that's a thing that people always sort of have questions about if you're not going to the exact school that you're assigned to, how that selection processes.
And I would like to, just to add to that, like to tag on to that and say, how does it work for kids that are in the school system already? And how does it work with kids that are coming in? Because I think you guys have a pretty strong process for the kids in the school.
Right.
That have choice, or kids that don't have choice. But it's the question I always had was like, what if you're coming from the outside? Because we do not, I hear this over and over again, we do not do school tours.
Yeah.
So how do we cross that over? But that can be future curriculum.
You
I
have
agree with
question
you on that.
face. What do I need to clarify?
I didn't know if you were asking about there's no choice in middle school.
That's what I was
right?
confused about,
right.
but we were talking about middle school choice. Is middle school choice
It's high school choice.
when you're in the middle school choosing the high school?
I'm sorry, there's no choice which middle school you go to.
Right, that's what
There's
I
an-
thought.
there's
I
an
was very
area-
confused for a hot second.
There's an area around Lower Merion that has choice to both schools. Everybody can go to Harriton. We have an IB program there. And there are people that are zoned to Lower Merion.
Okay. That might be one of our quick hits that we talk about in curriculum. That would be very helpful.
And there's a third option, which is there's Pocket that gets to choose which high school they go to.
Correct.
So there's the kids that are assigned to Lower Merion, there's kids that are assigned to Harriton. everybody can pick Harrington to ensure that they can have access to the IB program. And then there's the
choice
other pocket, which is you get to pitch with high school. So that choice happens in middle school, but it's for high school.
Right. Correct.
Talk about flow charts.
So apropos of this, Dr. Yanni and I had been talking a lot last year, and I know that he's no longer, I was going to say he's no longer with us, but that's not true. Mercifully, he's still alive and well. He's just in Doylestown. He's not at our district anymore, and I would like to follow up with you and maybe with you, Ms. Buckman, since it's probably a website thing, that we had talked about putting a widget on the website where you could put your address and it would give you the exact schools you were zoned for. And
We have that.
you do that?
It's the address finder on the transportation page. Yeah.
Okay, that would be really great. Could you email me that link? I wonder if maybe the transportation page is not exactly. It's on the registration page? Fantastic, that sounds.
We have a school choice widget, kind of, like, you know, making
would email me
practices
that link, that'd be great.
public and.
So when you go to the address finder, if you're in the choice zone, it will indicate that for the high school.
No, I meant like making it easy to find, because sometimes it's not, I wouldn't have thought to have to go to the transportation office to find.
It's on the registration page as well, but we.
Yeah, okay, so that makes that sense then, okay.
I guess we should think about maybe if there's some other way to put it on the homepage or something, because it's not, I've been here for years and I never knew that was a thing to the extent that I talked about having it done. So maybe, I know, Amy, you're like, I organized it and put it in the right place.
No, I actually didn't put it there. It's been there for a really long time. I think we do get inquiries from realtors.
Yeah.
From time to time, and I do direct the realtors to the link.
Yeah.
So that when people are moving into the area, the realtors know that they can use that to tell their clients what their school feeder patterns are.
So maybe we need a for realtor section for students, for parents.
Amy's like, please don't add another page to the website.
No, I think just
think the
calling it what's
only-
my home school is
Yeah, I think you could do that also without adding another layer to the website and just Google it and see the tagging. Because if we tag it right and somebody goes, which school would my kid go to in Lower Merion? If it's tagged right, then they'll find it on those pages. The realtor's a great idea though, giving it to them because but it's like all of our renters too is what I think of. Like who are the people that are coming in and renting and how do they get it if they don't go through a realtor? But I think a good tag could help, but let's see how tagged it is now.
Fantastic. Thank you for all of that work that I asked you to do that you've already done.
You're effective.
Thank you for anticipating the.
I love it when I ask for something and it's literally already done.
Okay, so there's not really anything we need to approve or anything, so it's just a matter of discussion. So are there any more committee questions that we have? Are there, anybody in the audience, community members have any questions in regards to this? No. Anything online?
So we have one question that looks like it's related to this, and then one related to a non-agenda item. Allison Crawford of Ballackinwood, there are many ways the district could make school choice easier for kids and parents. The Interschool Council has offered suggestions to at least 2 of the past superintendents.
Do we know about those suggestions at all?
I'm happy to follow up
Yeah.
with Ms. Crawford.
And if we do,
We have those.
and if we do end up putting that as a brief presentation in CCOB, we'll be sure to contact ISC for their input on that.
Thank you, Alice, for that question. So we'll get that note, and then we still have a couple more items on the agenda, correct?
Yes, and these are discussion items, so not for action today. One was to bring back the discussion on 262 relative to the terminology of using homeless versus unhoused, or making reference potentially to it, Ken and I had some discussion after this, or after our last meeting, knowing that homeless is the word that's used within the architecture of state and federal guidance for us, and knowing that, and as we've had that discussion earlier about how, language matters. If we use one versus the other, if we went directly to the term unhoused, I think that might cause some initial confusion about, what does that mean? Is that different than homeless? Just because that's the way in which we've, practiced the work for a long time. But I'm wondering, there could be a transitional option where we make reference to, like, also referred to or currently the preferred usage or terminology is unhoused. But I think I'm a little bit neutral on this at the moment, because I think as written, it allows us to serve the purposes of the legal requirements. But I wanted to bring it back because I know we had a bit of a discussion and someone asked about a little more of a deep dive into that. And that's where Ken and I ended up. Ken, I don't want to speak for you, but if there's any more discussion we want to have now, or we can just have it as something we revisit at a future time.
I mean, I'll speak up because it was my ask. It was me. I feel similarly to the person first language, that if we're gonna, respecting the least hurtful terminology isn't always convenient for us, but it's not necessarily about our convenience so much as other people's identities. And so if there were a way to accommodate that, I would appreciate it. I understand that functionally nothing particularly has to change, but I that's what I got.
I'd add to you, I mean, if we're going to be, for consistency, shoot, for consistency in the, from our discussion previously about student first language, I would like to, I've actually, since that meeting, have actually noticed how unhoused is the current terminology being used when you see it used publicly. And I like your idea of putting, like, because I'm sure there is some regulations that we need to comply with that uses that language. And if we could make it transitional, saying in this case, we're using homeless, but it refers to the blah, 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 But also that makes me question inconsistency. We have definitions in the policy. Will we be moving them to the AR in this review as well?
And I think also, just to piggyback before we move on, that if we wanted to put in our notes that the next time this comes up for review, we would more seriously consider that transition. But it's also a lead by example. I do that by, yes, it's harder to teach my parents to use newer, more modern terms, but I work on that. But I also teach my kids so that I know going forward, the changes will propagate that way.
So I'll defer to Ken on the definitions. We can move them, and then I'm wondering if something like where it's defined homeless, and just maybe if this is what the committee desires, to say something like in parens, preferred term, unhoused or something like that, and just say it that way.
I think we can do what you're looking for us to do. We can use different words and maybe drop a footnote to say that for all legal purposes, this term means what, homeless means under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act, something like that. I mean, it's kind of, when the seminal law that governs all of this has the word homeless in the title, that's why it can create confusion if you don't make it very clear what you're doing and why you're doing it, but I think we can still do it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Abby, did you have anything to add?
I had one question on the definitions, number 7, with migratory children. I'm noticing there's subtle differences in how it's being used now, and also, a lot of references to the Office of Civil Rights for definitions in that, and I wondered if we need to look a little further into it and add that as a possible reference. Yeah. So, any more questions from the committee? Okay. Any questions on the policy 262 from the audience with community members? No. No? And anything online?
Yes, we have one comment from Michelle McGill of Ballackinwood. Can you just add to the policy that you will be using the language unhoused to describe homeless students and then use unhoused moving forward?
So did we determine that we're going to be putting unhoused and parenthetical in some way? How, what did we determine?
Ken's gonna work on it.
Well, I think the question, though, is which one we put in the parenthetical? Do we put homeless and then say a transition to unhoused or unhoused, and then note, like, this is intended to be, you know, replace homeless in its entirety and drop a footnote that way? So I guess I'm asking the committee that. What's your preference to that?
I'd prefer to just make the switch, because I don't know if I mean, I can't speak for everybody else. I don't find it that confusing. Is it that confusing? It's just a different.
I don't think it's confusing, but I think at the same time, to what Ken was saying, that if the definitions and the legislation is using a certain terminology, I think it's appropriate to stay in keeping with that terminology. Just in terms of the fact, you know, it's one thing to use the word throughout. I think that I absolutely think it's, you know, there's no reason not to, except that I think there comes a point where we want to be consistent with the legislation that we're complying with. So that's my only sort of thought on that. I don't feel strongly, though.
I'm more, I lean more using unhoused. What is the term? And just in the definitions, we just say that they're, you
Front and center, say it's synonymous.
yeah, and if we move them over, just hyperlink to the definitions.
That was the impression I had. Okay.
Thank you. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness that y'all came at this with. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so this is just discussion, so will we be, do we need to approve to move it to a first reading, or are we ready to move it to? We can.
But there's no changes being proposed, so there's nothing to be done at this point.
Nothing to be done, so it will just show up on the agenda as for the next one. Okay, thanks. Okay. And next, one I'm kind of excited about.
Right. It feels like we need more time with this. This is just a teaser to like longer term discussions around something that I imagine will be a living, do you think of? Oh, the one. So again, this is gonna be many parts, I think, of an ongoing discussion, which is, I think, you know, incredibly interesting and exciting to think about from a policy standpoint, among other standpoints, but I like policy, so that's what I'm going to stick with.
Well,
And
Scott and I had conversation, and Sarah Thomas had conversation about potentially having a discussion about this in curriculum. So if we wanted to, at some point next semester, have like a co-committee discussion, that could be really nice.
so, so attacking it from a couple of different angles, knowing that, you know, sometimes it's helpful just to have a starting point, a point of reference, and this is really, you know, I'll let Ken speak to this, but I thought it's been sitting on our agenda for a while, but in starting to bring it to life, so we have, you know, do we love any of it? Do we hate all, you know, I think it's just helpful to get some language to work with, knowing that this is really just a starting point for discussion. And I think, like Shana said, really integrating it into other discussions that we'll have across different committees. Certainly internally, we've already had a lot of conversation with staff and students about use, both very productive use and some that are not as productive. But I think we've had enough experience that we do need to start to build more architecture around it. So we provide some guidance that's consistent to our school communities. So that's the introduction that I have. Ken, did you want to add anything from your experience? And
No, this is more shopping in someone else's closet.
In this economy, Did you, I'm just curious, did you use AI to generate this? I'm not even kidding, I'm really curious.
No. Not that I know of.
The reason I was wondering about it, yeah, you don't
I
know.
don't think it's pro AI enough for it to be.
Well, I wonder because there are, there are regulations referenced, and I was just.
put some typos in there too, right?
I
wondered what it knew to do.
to be completely honest, I'm not the one who drafted it, so I'm assuming that the attorneys from my firm that did draft this did not use AI, but I will ask them.
One other question, if I can.
I was going to say, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just jumped the. So I wonder if in discussing AI and how it will be, how I think it will be used, because who knows, if we want to flesh out in some way how the First Amendment rights apply in school, because it's different than in other places. And I wonder if that will be something to just consider, just putting it like in our minds as a placeholder for future.
There are,
I was going to say, we have.
the internet is replete with stories of lawyers who've gotten in trouble relying too heavily on artificial intelligence.
That's kind of what I'm thinking is, I mean, I wonder about, you don't want to run away from something because it's new and scary, but you also want to make sure that the way that it's taught, it's not the same. I know it's not the same, but it's similar to me in how training dogs works. So dogs they're animals, and they can be incredibly useful and functional, and we can live very symbiotically. But if things are not handled the correct way, or the way that is, sort of most appropriate, things can go quite wrong. So I think it's sort of a matter of, feeling educated and informed so that we can make good choices, as opposed to just don't.
Yeah, this is an issue that's very much building the plane while we fly it, if we're going for fun metaphors in this meeting. But that's generally kind of the consensus culturally with AI stuff. But I think that it's really good that we're having lots of discussion about it. And to your question, we definitely have enough material to have a whole big meeting about it.
Yeah.
So from my perspective, I look at this and I feel like very much treating it like it's a special project within a classroom, whereas I think this will become a tool within the classroom, as we are, the Pennsylvania State, or Pennsylvania Commonwealth has says that students we're supposed to put students who are work ready. They need to know how to use AI in the workplace. And how it's being used in the workplace now is people just have a tab open all the time with multiple AIs using the sites. And I'm thinking more of like the written side of things, as opposed to I know there's two sides. There's the art side and the music side, and videos and those things. But then there's also the written side. And the written side is like people have AI out there doing research. They have like a chat bot they've created. They put all their research into that and it summarizes stuff for them. And then they have a running list of things. And then they also have one that they come up and that just they're trying to finesse the language, and they put it in there, get the finesse of the language. And that's something that could be used on a daily basis. The way this is written, it's like you have to go to this, it's reading like you have to go for approval. And then also there's a thought of things that's the onus is putting onto the creator of the stuff to make sure it's fact checked and that. But I mean, that could be something that you could rely on AI as a chatbot to fact check for you, but then you have to go behind that and double check what is correct, because you can't rely that it's, but, I mean, those are the type of things that I think need to be more incorporated into the language, as far as thinking of it as an everyday tool in the classroom.
I think, oh, Scott, you go ahead. But I have a feeling we're going to say the same thing, and that kids need to learn how to do it before they can have someone else do it.
We can stay here for a really long time. There's a lot of complexities that we can talk
Yeah.
about, different categories. If I would simplify it and put it in two big ones, it's we're preparing young people for a world that's going to increasingly have more AI in it. And it's incumbent upon us to be able to prepare them to do that. And we recognize that and are already taking steps to that. On November 30th, 2022, chat went live and caught a lot of people by surprise, including high school English teachers that are grading essays the next day when they don't know who wrote it. So when we think about policy, we're also wrestling with how do we manage academic integrity and what's needs to be somebody's own work. So those are things we're all thinking about, and policy will hopefully help guide us, as policy does frequently.
And if I can jump in with one more layer of complexity, because Bob did leave and George is retired, we also have COPA considerations, and we have an obligation to protect children from things they could be exposed to on the internet.
Child Online Predator Act?
Well,
What does COPA stand for?
it's the Child Online
Children's Online
Protection.
Privacy Protection Act.
Privacy protection, yeah. And so, you know, you can use AI for, show me a picture of something. So we need to, from that protection level as well, consider that. So, I mean, as everybody's been saying, there's just a lot of complexities.
I so agree with you on that. And in some ways, there's guardrails on certain sites, and certain sites have no guardrails. And it's like, how do you manage to ensure that if sites used in the classroom are the guardrail sites?
And I will say one other thing, like we're using AI for things like translation of documents, but we have to be very careful about which kinds of documents we're translating, because we don't know where that information is going or who has access to it. So we will use it now for a form that is generally available, but we will not use it for anything like an IEP or something that has student identification in it. I'll put a blank form in to get a translation, but not something that would have any information about a student. So again, like, just, there's so much to learn and it's evolving so quickly. I think that's going to be the big challenge.
Yeah, isn't it that if you put a file in, doesn't become, that's your property still, but if you put, if you write, anything you write in the thing becomes a learning tool as part of the.
It depends which AI
Yeah.
site you're using, what their privacy, and a lot of it, we just don't know, so.
I think,
Sorry. And if somebody uses it in a bad way, then what you have to do is go and like sue them about it rather than, it's like it's a response rather than a prevention measure. And so, yeah.
I think, listening to all of this conversation, I think this one thing that might be good to think about is, you know, as Melanie said, and then also as Amy was saying, you know, this is sort of, we're looking at it as a tool, and then, well, different people might be using it differently. I think maybe when we kind of flesh out the actual policy, if we can specify similar, I keep going back to the service animal, but, you know, there's staff, there's students, and there's visitors, sort of a similar, like, this is how students are expected to use AI, this is how teachers are expected to, or staff is expected to use AI, staff including everybody who works for the district, like, not necessarily teachers per se, but everyone. And then, you know, potentially even, I don't know if consultants is the right word, but like.
Non-school entities.
Right. And I think that will also sort of help to flesh out how the function of the AI is, you know, because I would love to recommend, by the way, just a return to writing and, you know, learning spelling. I think it's great. My own kids who are in elementary school, they don't really need to spell. They tell me all the time. They don't really need to. And I think that we should, you know, kind of highlight the importance of, this is how critical thinking works, is you have to know what the right answer is and then understand how to measure what you're reading against it.
Yeah, it's kind of like when calculators first came out and you're like, you don't need to know the times table. And then you realize you really do.
And I think what this discussion helps serve is that idea of where do we start? And that purpose statement is really important, like what's our vision and value from a board standpoint, like that helps flesh out, like where do you put what? So I think as we think about future meetings, CCOB, how do we continue to try to come up with that purpose statement or vision for the work, so we're all on the same page, like we value it with these conditions, or, and for these categories, and noting all of the complexity of it. But if we're aligned in a statement, like, normally, we do start with a purpose statement and a policy and not just a definition. So I think will help us create all of the different threads and tentacles of this once we align on that statement.
And I'll just add in that I know that this is a topic that a lot of our parents, guardians, wider community have thoughts and feelings about. And so if you wanted to share with us, as we're doing it, the chairs of this committee are Melanie and Anna Shurak. Me and Sarah Thomas are the chairs of the curriculum committee. And you can email Megan, Ms. Schaefer, and Mr. Weinstein, if any or all of us, if you have thoughts on this, and we can use that as part of our general perspective and consideration as we go forward on that.
We're currently on a listening tour on this topic. So the last one, which is 2 minutes, there's no paper associated with it. So I just wanted to, I mentioned at the outset, some of the bigger projects we're diving into for future discussion. Student activities is one that's been pending for a while that I keep using this term, so I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to come up with another one next time. It needs some architecture. So like student athletics, student activities, we have a lot of activities that support our students or are offered to our students in our schools across the district. And I do get a lot of questions about consistency, practices, oversight, things like that. And we don't have like a source document to say like, here's what it looks like, generally speaking. We're always going to have differences, and I would always advocate for having differences across schools based on what the student population and the availability of staff and interest, et cetera. That said, we need a little more architecture around that, the way in which we allocate funding, staff, provide facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that is for the winter, spring discussion. So like I said, I think that continuing discussions about AI and the policies that are listed for future discussion will allow for a lot of robust conversation and work for us.
Can I ask a question about that?
Of course.
So, with regard to student activities, is there a place, I've looked on the website and I don't know. So is there a place where you can see everything that's being offered? Because in addition to, I understand, the idea of consistency across schools, it's not feasible, but to know what is offered and then to kind of have like something to check against, oh, this exists elsewhere, maybe I could bring it here, or this doesn't exist,
In terms of activities or in terms of services?
both, all.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so can we start with activity? I'm just thinking this is intended to reference the extracurricular activities that are optional opportunities for students. And yes, I know Amy's about ready to jump on her mic, but we do have those listed now. Are they always all encompassing? Because and that's part of the thing, like we want to know when we launch something new, where does it go? Where can someone get access? So your question is very much related to like what we'd like to set up in terms of expectations. Amy?
So we don't have a district activities tab that shows what's offered all across the districts, but each school's homepage has an activities tab, and you can click on that, and it will show. So you'd have to do, at this point, your
A little
own
digging.
compare and contrast. But again, because and especially at the high school level, so many of the activities are student-generated.
Yeah.
They do differ from school to school. It's one of the ways we honor student voice, is if kids want to start a club or an activity, and they can find a sponsor, they can basically do that. So they do differ from school to school.
Well, that's helpful to know. So then my question on top of that are those, school landing pages, lists, are those checked, or are those, not checked, that's not the right word I mean to say, updated? Because there might be organizations that, because they're student-led, if the students have rolled off, if they've graduated and there's not as much, like, did things get sunset? Did things get, because if there's a balance, a fund balance, and there's money in it, like, how does that, because those are all kind of questions that attach to student activities and how we are essentially tracking, for lack of a better word, what exists where and how. So is that updated? Is that something that we can?
We update it in terms of when we hear from the activities and athletics directors or from the principals, especially because the sponsors may change and the contact information for the sponsors is on there. So when we hear that from the schools, we do update.
And any staff member that's a sponsor of a student activity there's remuneration for them? Or are some of them voluntary? Okay. And is that something that's, that we describe in a policy or an AR, what student activities, which ones require or are entitled to payment for the staff member and which ones do not?
I probably wouldn't, but that's covered by the collective bargaining agreement.
Oh, okay.
Stipends, so,
As long as it's laid out for our staff
but we could
somewhere,
cross-reference
that's
that or
just,
something.
yeah, I just didn't want it to be a sort of, I feel like this kind of, as long as it's laid out, I mean, and frankly, our collective bargaining unit is great and laid out and very detailed, and so if it's detailed there, then I feel really comfortable with that, thank you.
I mean, it's very organic, but I mean, we also have to think about it differently between the school levels, because I think if it's still true, when my daughter was in elementary school, the student activities are very different across each elementary school because they're HSA led. And,
They're not all HSA led either, so at least, in some elementary schools. So that's why it's sort of
more of the enrichment things were usually led, and then the sports type things were more school led. And
it depends. I think it really,
yeah, it might have changed, and, yeah.
COVID changes.
Yeah, that's true.
Again,
An
some of
audit
the
would be
questions
good,
you're
yeah.
asking are why we want to kind of come back and,
Yeah.
oh, did you?
I was just going to add that we do have our student and family handbooks, and particularly at the high school levels, it does list the activities are available, that we work closely with the athletic and activities directors to communicate what is offered, at least at the onset of the year. So it may also be another opportunity to do that better in the elementary and middle school books.
And cross-reference those handbooks with what's on the websites, just to sort of see. I mean, I know it sounds like really cumbersome, but it would be helpful, and it would be also just a good audit for us to know what we're offering and where.
We need somebody who's one of the high school seniors that are doing either business classes or statistics classes to take it on as their senior project, to make a really, really great interactive spreadsheet with all the district-wide activities and what grades they're for.
Or if we could use AI, this would be great.
Do you have oh, yeah. On, the stuff we've been just discussing? Not about that. You have something, oh, can you, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, and this,
It's that we're recording and live streaming, and so you can't be
Yeah.
heard, that's why.
I learn every time. We all can learn, right? Does this have anything to do, Holly in Wynwood?
give your-
Holly Salzberg Duncan in Wynwood. Does this have anything to do with the Right at School that actually has started different programs after school at different elementary schools, but they're not all the same, and not all elementary schools want to do it, but it's through Right at School? I don't know, but.
Great question. Right to School has supported HSAs with offering activities at some of our elementary schools. That's what I think you're referring to. This administrative regulation was intended to refer to district-sponsored activities only. So HSAs not included in this. I mean, we might think about cross-referencing that or making some note of it, but this is about the activities that are sponsored by the district for district students.
I just wasn't sure because someone had mentioned the Right at School is contracted through the district. So I didn't know.
They provide, they basically rent space from us to offer before and after school programs for our students, but they're not, we don't contract them, they lease from us, basically.
Okay, thank you.
So we have two public comments on the Zoom regarding this subject. One is from Jill Altschuler of Marion Station. The high school activities list is rarely updated to reflect all current clubs. I heard there is a Middle East club at Harriton and maybe LM, but couldn't find any info last I checked last week. There's a comment from Allison Crawford of Ballackinwood on the topic of activities differing by school. I understand that only Belmont, oh, wait, it just jumped, hold on. Only Belmont Hills and Penwyn do not currently have Right at School clubs available for their students, even though the HSAs are desperate to set them up. Perhaps the administration could address that. Oh, and there's more. They're popping up as we speak. Kara Herman of Ballackinwood, president of the Committee for Special Education. We would really like to advocate for better communication from the district to parents, guardians, students regarding opportunities for special needs students to participate in clubs and sports teams and other extracurricular activities. And then, this is, okay, these are on other subjects. So when we get to general discussion, I have more.
We can look into the Right at School issue. We'll check in with just a reminder to update websites around activities that are available to our schools. And Kara, to your point, activities, that's one of the, I see that as one of the areas that we'll cover under that administrative regulation as well, to clarify opportunities and there as well. So another opportunity to communicate, but we will continue to look for ways to ensure that we're making those connections clear to our community. And I think Amy said there's a few more.
I just was one thing I was thinking back to, more so this is through the lens of what my daughter and her friends were telling me, is like they really didn't have any activities that met their needs, and they actually never participated. They were part of the kids that just hung out in the stairwell during times. And a lot of it is that not all kids are self-advocating enough to go out and set the club up that would actually something they'd like to see. It would be nice if there was a way that kind of created an environment where there would be a motivation to do that, as far as teachers reaching out saying, hey, I'm willing to work with you with clubs and stuff like that. If there's even just a general meeting that with teachers and with a list of teachers who are willing. So it's not so you running around the school trying to find somebody who would try and meet your needs. I'm not, as a principal, a former principal of a high school, would you, is that something you would see as something that?
It's, Ms. Buckman was speaking earlier, it has been a fluid process, and it's usually dependent on on students' interests and wants. And to your point, Ms. Rubin, sometimes people graduate and that club isn't running, and it is noted that that should be updated more frequently. But the flow of this, each school usually has an activity fair, mainly for the transition plan, sometimes on move-up day when 8th graders come in, because we understand the significance of getting involved with your school beyond the academic program and how important that is. So we'll run an activity fair where all the club sponsors and sports will run tables and students will sign up to gather interest. And then in the fall, it usually happens again. And the numbers do fluctuate, like clubs arise, and then some drop off depending on interest. So it's really responsive to what the kids want. But to the greater point that I'm hearing frequently is sometimes that's not as updated in real time, which is a challenge, but we should be doing better. Yep.
Thanks.
To your point, Mel, though, I think that if there was a way to have teachers that were open to being, like, particularly open to being approached by students for development of clubs, that would be a really great way that, like, even if there was just like a running list either on the school website or in an office or something where, like, I know that I can talk to Ms. Buckman, but I can't talk to Mr. Weinstein because he's already chairing 3 clubs or whatever.
And the way it generally works are teachers that are, students that have teachers they have relationships with, they'll often ask. A lot of times these are done during the school day at the high school level, like we're talking about is lunch and learn frequently. And these are typically volunteer. Just because we start a club doesn't mean somebody automatically starts getting paid. There's also a culture that clubs, to your point, like we want students to get involved. There's also a culture where there's clubs that exist that people don't always want to join, but they want to start their own and be president. And so it's one of the push and pulls that like you do in a high school to try to allow for student leadership, but also grow existing clubs and have structure to them. And it's something that every high school nationwide wrestles with.
Yeah, and just to go back a little further, that if that was something, I know we have leadership classes in the middle school. I know my kid is in one right now, that could be something we could talk about, maybe inserting into the curriculum of, or like as a project, or not even making a curriculum, but suggesting it maybe to some of our middle grade leadership teachers of having a project of thinking about getting together with some friends and thinking about what kind of club you might want and thinking about what teacher you might want, what the process for, I don't know if there's an application that you write to the school to get it, like how the approval process works. That could be a real practical, if student leadership is how we want to focus that.
There is a process, there's a form that lives in the athletic and activities director's office that you would fill out and share the students that were involved, what the purpose of the club is. We do generally look for like interests and try to get clubs that are long-standing, that have structures that you can become an officer when you're a senior if you participate in 4 years. So we do like seeing long-standing clubs. We also like seeing kids' interests being met and clubs being formed that didn't exist before. So that balance of, hey, what you want to do already exists, join something, become an officer, is something that we want to promote while trying to cover all interest levels.
Is that process in the student handbook? The process they see with the form and everything, is that in the student handbook?
I don't believe that it is, but it could be.
I love that you look to LaToya like you have the, like I looked at you and I said, you have the entire handbook memorized, and I'm so impressed.
She does.
Okay, on this topic? Yeah, okay.
Ms. Altschuler from Marion Station, I presented Dr. Johnson with the idea of having a mental health-related club with 2 to 3 specific examples of clubs that exist nationally. So there is no significant legwork that would need to be done to create the club, no need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, for something that exists successfully at many schools across the country. The response was that the students need to come up with the idea on their own, to which I asked if the idea of the club could at least be presented to see if any students would be interested. The answer was essentially no. I firmly believe this would be an extremely valuable club, and I would be happy to present the information to anyone who is willing to consider this, please.
And again, I think the question of how do clubs evolve, like if we can put those answers into an activities AR, it's clear that those, at least right now, the work typically evolves from student voice, staff availability, et cetera. So that's not to say that that's not a great idea. I mean, I think having clubs generally support student wellness in really meaningful ways, because they get kids engaged in their school communities with around interests that, are common. And I think that just having clubs, and a reason I would, never advocate to get rid of them, even though they are administratively and operationally and budgetarily an investment. I think they bring real value and connect kids with their learning in really important ways. So I just think activities by alone give a dimension of wellness to students, but even more specifically, I don't think it's, that would be a club not to consider. It's just a matter of like, let's be clear about how we go about that process of considering clubs. How do they come to attention, or, our attention? How do we run the process through? So I think, again, that is what we will intend to do in that AR.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you for all the comments. Is there anything else on that topic? Okay, so let's start with, in-house. Do you have, are there any general comments that you have?
I had one more question about letter B on the policy AR 236.
Oh, are
and
we
I just-
moving on? Okay.
Just before future, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know, I was curious if that would be the kind of place where it would be spelled out when physical restraint was.
Yes.
Okay, I think that would be a really good one that we should be absolutely in touch with CSE on and invite them to attend all, well, we aren't great, fantastic, because I know that that's something that we've.
Kara's still listening. We have
Yes.
had conversations about that, and when I referenced earlier, opportunities to provide more, public opportunities to learn about it is connected to that policy as well. So
That's great. Because I really love this for future discussion section. I don't know if that's always been a part of this agenda, but this conversation's been really great in that, like, I like knowing that we're teeing up these topics and we can say, okay, if this is a thing you're interested in, if this is a group that might be interested in, we can reach out and make sure that those people are trying to, I know not everybody can attend every board meeting, but if you have an issue that you're really passionate about and you have thoughts and feelings specifically on that, you can start before we even get things going and help us with our perspective. And so that's been really fun and a great new aspect of being on this board. So thanks.
Thank you for coming. And maybe you'll see me at curriculum.
Hey, you'll definitely be at curriculum because it's immediately following our board reorg meeting
I know.
this December because we're moving the date of the meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Spoiler alert.
Okay, so back to comments. You want, who's coming up first? Thanks. Okay.
Hi, Michelle Vessel from Gladwin. I just noticed on the agenda, what I saw online is different. There was something, number 2, anti-racism and equity inquiry, and there was like a lot of questions that seemed very interesting that I really wanted the answers to. I didn't see that here, that we didn't go over it at this meeting. It was anti-racism equity inquiry, who does the policy impact in particular, et cetera. There's like a lot. So I was just wondering, because I know you can change the topics in the meetings. Will this be discussed in a future meeting at a different time?
So this has been a feature of the agenda for, I'm trying to think of the first time, maybe 2020. And it was connected to work that we had done in the Equity and Anti-Racism Ad Hoc Committee at that time, which was, when we first talked about it or introduced it, wasn't intended to be like every time we explicitly go through these questions, but a reminder that are we thinking about the impact of policy in particular, because it does have intended to have a broad reach, identifying, or like as we think as we sit as a committee, wonderings, and just making sure that we're keeping that sort of at the forefront in our discussion.
It's a lens, right, for approaching every topic that we're looking for rather than a specific. I can see where your confusion was because we have the equity policy on the agenda. It's on every single policy agenda so that we have that lens on
Got it,
every
because I didn't
policy
see that
we-
before, so I thought this was going
yeah,
to be
no, it's been there
discussed
for a
and
while.
answered.
Yeah.
Okay, I never noticed that
It's just,
before.
it's not usually a one-page agenda. It's usually
There's usually more.
a packet.
Got it, okay, I got that. So then, I just had some follow-up questions. I didn't know if this is like the policy meeting, the right place to ask, but I had a question about the DEI director being out on medical leave. Do we have somebody acting in her position while she's out?
issues or questions or inquiries that are coming up are typically referred to LaToya, and she works with me to make sure that we're covering that in the moment. There are things that, it depends on the nature of the need, but it's being covered internally at this point.
Okay. And I wanted to ask about anti-Semitism training, because I know we have in-services coming up and other things, and I know it's been brought up multiple times with the district, and I don't think there was ever, I'm not aware of an answer, a set answer of a date or when this can take place or how to be rolled out with not just the school board, but teacher training and for students as well. I think a lot of work was done last year by different outside groups, and there were places that were vetted to be able to do the training, and they were approved by Dr. Yanni, but I believe it's never taken place yet, and, or maybe there was a beginning, but do you have any answers about anti-Semitism training?
We've continued to advance some of the work that was done last year in terms of identifying some partnerships that would help support work within our schools, both for staff and students, so that work is continuing. I also think, in terms of taking a deeper dive into that, that probably is, a CCOB conversation as well.
that?
But we are continuing our.
CCOB is curriculum committee of the board.
Okay.
And so that
So
would
that
be,
should be brought up in the curriculum meeting?
it's,
I think there's connection to both, and I don't want to defer it there. I'm also happy to talk offline about more specifics, but we are continuing and have advanced partnerships with relationships, like I said, that had started last year, so.
So not talking about the Weissman Museum field trips. So I'm talking about anti-Semitism training that will be able to go over with the school board and with the administration and with the teachers to be able to identify it, how to handle it, to know what it is, also rolled out for the children as well, not like, I know there was like a video that was played, like a 5-minute video, supposed to be played in all of the classes, advisory classes, but I know that my son's class never played it, even though I think the teacher said that he did. So I guess I'm just curious what other things are being worked on. If you could, can you be more specific of who the partners are, or?
I mean, I can be more specific in terms of who the partners are to provide training. I don't want to speak to anything that was necessarily promised, because that work was sort of not grounded in like the system that we have in place for providing training. So we're working to do that now and make sure that we have the capacity to do it in the way that we like to do training with all of our staff. And it's ongoing work that we're including in our professional learning plans moving forward. I don't have a specific date for you at this point in time in terms of the training, but as I think we've shared out previously, all our administrators were trained last year on anti-Semitism. It's an expectation that our leadership is working with staff to identify all sorts of work around anti-discrimination, anti-hate speech within their school environments. And anti-Semitism is another concept that we expect our leadership, now that they've been trained, to implement and incorporate into how they work with their staff. So whether that's a specific date and time, I don't have that for you, but that's an expectation that we have for all of our leadership teams.
So based on, actually, what about the school board? Because were they trained?
I don't have that information. I know that there's a plan to move forward.
Not
Okay.
yet, not yet.
Thank you.
There's a
So,
board-
Thanks.
at the
so
last
is that something that also has to be done the same way as the teacher training, or is that something, I mean, do you see this in reality happening this year? Either one, school board training on anti-Semitism and,
So interest in school
Anti-Semitism
board
in the
training
school.
on anti-Semitism has come up in not, that ask from the community is pretty recent, and so it is
Right.
something that the board itself is doing legwork, and the plans are being worked on right now, but they are not in place. We are a group of volunteers, we're working to schedule it.
Okay.
It is definitely something that we are planning and we have discussed as a group doing, because it's frankly, not something that there is a rule. The only required training for school board members is set down by the state, and that is run by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association, and we do that. There's an initial one when you're first elected, and then there's a renewal when you're reelected. And so there's a lot of voluntary trainings that you can do as a school board member, but beyond that, it's not required. We as a school board have discussed, as this school board have discussed what we wanted to do, and I know it is not a project that I'm spearheading, but I believe Curry and Jason are working on that and working on deciding what program and what training they'd like to do, and then we will work on scheduling that for a group.
And so is that something then, because it's not required, would that be something that a school board member can then just opt out of and not attend that training?
Pretty sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so,
I won't say that just because that is legally possible, I would not assume that that is a thing that will happen. It is possible, sure. It's legal. If I decided I'm Jewish, I don't need to go to anti-Semitism training, there is not, I believe, anything that any of my fellow board members could do to force me to. But that does not mean that I or any of my colleagues would choose to make that decision, because I personally think that would be a foolish decision to do. It is, I want to assure everyone that it is in the works, and it is something that the board is absolutely aware of and absolutely working on, but things do not sort of spring into existence, and they do take legwork, and they take more time than they feel like they should from the outside. But it's a matter of due diligence and scheduling and approving expenditures for such trainings, and there's a lot of balls in the air. Stuff is getting done, it's just not there yet.
so realistically, then, with you saying it's a lot of work goes into it, when do you think it would occur?
I have
6
no idea.
months, a year?
I mean, my personal hope is that it will be done this year, this school year, not calendar year, because I think the likelihood that with school holidays and just where we are on the calendar, the likelihood that it would happen this year is pretty slim. My hope, and I speak for myself and not the board, my hope is that it would be done this school year.
If I would add to you that I feel that there is an intent to have it within the school year. We are trying to also hire a new superintendent at the same time, and so there's a lot of meetings. And at the last full board meeting, Curry did talk about how they're working with an interfaith group, and that to lead us in training. So, and when this happens, it will be made public. So there is an intent for this to take place.
Okay, because based on the climate and things that happen, do you sometimes prioritize what kind of in-service training you want to do? I mean, we've been asking for anti-Semitism training for 2 years now, starting last year and now this year. So I know it's in the works, and now, I mean, do you see it happening, not just for the school board, but for the teachers? And something for the students this year? Is there? I know it's in the works. I'd just like to know what my expectation is.
Does PD usually get scheduled before the school year starts for the whole school year? That was my thought, but I don't know if I just made that up in my head.
There are professional learning goals for the school year based on the needs, either community-based needs, but also more specifically curriculum-based needs in our classroom, changes to programs, other, teaching and learning. So we have to, so we know what our sort of inventory of topics generally for the year, and then we know we have limited opportunities to build that in. And so figuring out over the course of the year where those things fit is what we have to do a little bit on an ongoing basis. So the map is, and we've also had transitions. Like, I want to also put, shine some light on the fact that we've had transitions in fairly key leadership positions over the last few months. And so there is the way in which we have to look at the work and prioritize is also recognizing that there are people that are new to the work that need an opportunity to provide, that guidance for everyone. So I'm not able to give you a specific answer today because it's not a one-person decision. There has to be a team effort, and it doesn't mean that there isn't ultimately a decision that lands in my lap about whether we do it or not. But I also have to defer to what are the other needs and understand where that's mapped out. So I can't give an answer specific on when that training would occur within the scope of this year. But it is something we can continue to ask, and I will see if we have better information that I can provide to you next time, or more generally the public.
One of those topics that we generally would focus on for our professional development is equity, correct?
Yes, equity, we have annual training on our policies, that broadly include, anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, and so equity is also part of that.
Okay, and can we make specific note that as discussion of putting together that PD, we also include anti-Semitism as part of that consideration? So that's part of it, to have a specific place where we've called out and included it in that discussion?
Yes, and with the revisions that we've made to the policy and the administrative regulation, that's something we can also make sure that staff are aware of.
That's
So
great.
is it in there already? Like you said, you have it on your things that are in the works and on the list from last year. It's in there.
In the,
The revision.
the revision to the
No, the
equity one.
anti-Semitism training. It's on your list for things for the in-service training.
It's among the topics that we would put on the table in terms of what needs to be covered this year. So specifically anti-Semitism training versus it being part of conversations or training that we have is on the table, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is anybody else speaking? Here.
Hi, I'm Danny Shaw, Haverford. So firstly, thank you for reaching out, and I'm looking forward to our in-person meeting in a couple of weeks. I was going to talk about anti-Semitism training, but Michelle's already done that. So while we're still waiting to roll that out, amongst other important curriculum initiatives, I just wanted to remind you that I shared yesterday an article from the Free Press. I don't know whether anyone's seen it. I shared it with all of the board members. It detailed an expose on a 2-year undercover operation into radical indoctrination across school districts nationally. And it's what's bringing Title VI discrimination lawsuits to these districts. And if you haven't read the article yet, or even watched the 15-minute video that's been put out, I urge you to do so as soon as possible. So it seems to me, instead of opting for anti-Semitism training, which we could have done very, very easily, we had Stand With Us lined up to do this training next Monday, the 4th. But still on the subject of academic integrity, complexity, identity, capacity, all things that we've mentioned this morning. really late last night, it was brought to my attention that there is a planned in-service on critical literacy run by Drew Gingrich, our, I believe, current acting curriculum supervisor, for this Tuesday. And this is really highly concerning. What is critical literacy? Do you know what our school district is planning to train our teachers to impart to our students this coming Tuesday? Is anyone aware of that? According to Roots Connected, Educating for Equity, critical literacy is not a teaching method, but a way of thinking and a way of being that challenges texts and life as we know it. Critical literacy focuses on issues of power and promotes reflection, transformation, and action. It encourages readers to be active participants in the reading process, to question, to dispute, and to examine power relations. This may sound benign on the surface, but it is anything but. You may have heard the term critical consciousness. It's a pedagogical principle that is at the very foundation of the radical trends in California K-12 education, often referred to as liberated ethnic studies. It's the basic idea that the role of schools is to teach students to recognize and resist systems of oppression. In other words, to teach students to resist our current system. Critical literacy is simply another name for the same pedagogical framework. Now, you may ask, what's wrong with teaching students to see systems of oppression? This question really gets to the heart of the matter. The people teaching this pedagogy pretend to know who exactly is doing what to whom in our society. They believe that all of our national and even global problems can be boiled down to the white supremacists did it. They are teaching students to blame our problems on what they perceive as the hidden white supremacy that exists in every nook and cranny of society. In short, the people teaching this pedagogy are using the classroom to indoctrinate students in their political opinions. Critical literacy is not an academic skill, it is a theory. And if we train teachers in this political theory, we are training them to indoctrinate students in a single political perspective. Critical literacy may sound like critical thinking, but is actually the very opposite. Teaching critical thinking requires that our students are exposed to multiple points of views and theories. Critical literacy imparts just one. I would urge you, please, to hit the pause button on this. It's happening on Tuesday, if you allow it to go ahead. Allowing it, though, will set a course for our school system that will widen the gulf between parents and schools. It will generate resentment among many parents and students and provide a permission structure for radical actors to politicize our classrooms. Why this has even been allowed to actually take place when we are yet to even train the board on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which was adopted last year. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. We'll take that back and work with our supervisor to have a better understanding so that we can share that out as a response. I don't want to make a comment, but I don't know that I don't believe, as I sit here today, knowing the individual leading that, that the way that you described it is aligned with that. And I think there's, language matters. And I would like to have an opportunity to dig into that a little bit more and get, and follow up with you.
It's
But
really
again,
important.
the way you
We'd like to
described
see
it
all the
was not
slides.
necessarily, I think that's one way that it's framed and not necessarily a universal way that critical literacy is framed or the intent behind it. But let me get in and get some more information
It may
and share
well
it
not
back.
be his personal intent, and I'm sure it's not, but this is a really big problem, and we would like to see the slides. I mean, this is a really big problem, and it's inviting a much bigger problem. This is like the architecture for big problems in the future. So I'm bringing this to your attention. Be really grateful if you could hit pause on it until we know exactly what's going to be trained.
I have a real concern with the way that you're framing that. I have a real avoidance to the use of the idea that we are indoctrinating our students and our children to something. Frankly, if we could indoctrinate them to something, it would be to every child get their homework in on time. We are not, as a district, or, I mean, I will speak for myself, my impression of the people who run this district, nobody is out there trying to make lots of little Jew haters or any haters of any kind. That is not the approach of the district. And understanding the fact that white supremacy is real is not indoctrination, and it's not damaging our students. I understand if you have a different perspective on that, but I do not believe that the way you presented it as fact is necessarily the way that, I won't speak for everyone, I will speak for myself. I do not view that concept in the same way.
I mean, you only have to open your eyes to see what's going on across the country, really.
I do,
We
and
already
that
know
is-
that Jews are seen as, white oppressors. I mean, that's very clearly been very well
I understand
documented.
that, but I also know that it's not a Jews versus everyone. And just because we belong to an oppressed group does not mean that there are not other oppressed groups that exist. And frankly, Jews have been victims of white supremacy.
It's not something that should be taught in the classroom, full stop. Oppressor, oppressed is the wrong, this whole DEI, oppressor, oppressed is not the way we should be teaching our kids, and certainly not the way teachers should be trained, especially when there's a zero. We've adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, but the board have not even been trained in what that definition actually means.
You're entitled to your opinion, and I disagree that teaching equity to our students and our staff is anything other than incredibly valuable to their.
We're requesting.
I gave you your time to speak, even though you disagreed. Please let me finish my sentence. I disagree that teaching students equity is anything other than something that will be incredibly valuable to create full and moral humans that will hopefully do a better job of maintaining our society and improving our society than our generations have.
I think in light of the fact that the election is on Tuesday and it's going to be a very divisive day regardless, I think this is really urgent to consider what the actual content is. I've read the piece, I've watched the videos as well. There are very concerning things coming down the pike along, kind of different channels. I think it's really important that we look at it with a very open mind and understand where concerns are coming from. We have a responsibility as, board members and also as grown-up administrators to really ensure that whatever is being presented to our teachers and by, down the pike, our students is being considered with a very full and open mind. And I am concerned by what we're hearing. It's not a matter of one side versus the other. It's a matter of we should really be working to, as Shana just said, we want to help, the goal is to graduate the best citizens that we can. I don't think that something so divisive is going to do that. So I would really encourage that we do look at this with some urgency, because if all of that is, if that's all happening, even if the intention is not for it to happen, we have to be considerate of what could happen as a result. We're seeing a rise. We're seeing a lot of normalization of things that we really don't want. So let's please consider that this, has some urgency.
Thank you.
Thanks. Oh, I think what Megan has said that she's going to look into it and we're going to get back. And if you have any further questions, you can reach out to us. So I think, I hear your concerns and we're going to look into it because we're kind of like, this is the first I've heard about it. So.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Are there any more comments? Oh, did you? No. Oh.
Hi, so Holly Salzberg in Wynwood. Going off what she just said, Danny said, white supremacy is a very scary topic. Nobody wants to hear about any of that. The very idea of anyone oppressing anyone is terrible. When people are now talking about white supremacy, it seems to be coming, not that our kids shouldn't know and learn about history and terrible things that have happened and happen today. They're talking about, and I started researching it at 1 a.m. last night, they're talking about almost everywhere. It's behind every corner. Watch out for, it becomes like over everything. So I think the question is, what exactly is being taught? Things look really good up front, and then you start delving in, and it's like the fingers being pointed at many people that aren't doing necessarily what is said to be, is being done. So it's asking to look into something that deeper might not be what it says it is. And some districts have allowed it in, haven't done all the research maybe, and their intent was in all positive ways. Because I really do believe everyone's trying to look out for all the different types of kids that are in the school. But then they find out further that it's actually kind of almost teaching a little bit more of hate in a way that we never saw could be there, because we don't want to believe in that kind of way of teaching, because that's not what, like, I think most of our hearts want to believe. So I think the pause button is, what is it exactly? You know, what is it exactly? And I think that's a fair and valid question to ask. I think there's a lot going on across the United States, and it's really scary, and we're all really scared, and we're really passionate about it. But if you don't feel like there's communication or transparency, and this is 3 minutes here or 2 minutes there, and you don't know about something, it can kind of come out stronger, but like, we don't know what it is. So it's also hard to hear when you've done a lot of research and you're really careful about organizations that you look into, and it's been approved in writing, and I know that person's not here anymore, but he was our superintendent. And then you hear comments like, well, maybe anti-Semitism can fall under, you know, hate speech or other prejudices or other types of racism. It can, but I also do believe that it should stand alone. I also think most of us are really aware that it's always existed, but right now it's a lot worse. And when you talk about equity, there's a Jewish community that needs help, not to take away from any other community. They need help too. But it's okay to maybe let anti-Semitism stand alone, because we need it, so that we can have better dialogue, more open communication. So that's what people last year have been working so hard for. So going on what's happening on Tuesday for the in-service about the potential critical literacy or critical consciousness, when was that discussed? When was that decided? I know you talk about different planning, and I know you talk about priorities and things being able to be changed. I'm not sure, Megan, I'm sorry, there's so many meetings, and I don't remember if it was at the ISC roundtable that you talked about, you know, when things become a real priority and when we really hear from our community and we know we need to get something in, we will change the agenda, we will change the topic, the plan, and then we have to figure out a way to get very important things in other areas, but we can and will do it. So the question is, if this is happening with Drew, and you guys aren't totally aware about it or how it was framed, when was this discussed? Who discusses it? Who okays it? What committee? Like, is there a public way of the community knowing about it? Can parents know what, or should parents? Maybe that's a better question. What does our staff learn about? Where can we go and find out about it? Who do we ask questions to? So that's a lot. I'm going to pause.
So historically, where we've had opportunity, I guess, to communicate publicly about the professional learning has been at board meetings or CCOB, but that's also been driven by what the particular board agendas are. There's not always time or interest. It's not typically, I mean, in my experience here, I've been to every board meeting for the last 10+ years. We haven't necessarily had the conversation, nor has there been a community ask for that or a board ask for that. So I'm just sharing, like, historically, that's not been a feature of what we've had public conversation about, because it's, I think, and I don't want to speak for other districts, but I think we're like other districts in that that's the business of the administration to lead under the authority of the board and the policies of the board, to ensure that with respect to curricular objectives and other objectives that we're providing the appropriate training for our staff. And it's within the discretion of the leadership to do that effectively. And so I think that's largely just sort of the assumption that the board operates under, because they can't be in the weeds either. Everyone has a lane and a responsibility. So one of the responsibilities of the board is, important responsibilities is to set policy, for example. So under that is where we get our framework and take action. So when you ask about sort of the inventory of professional learning, that's not necessarily something that's inventoried or shared out on a particularly regular basis here, and I don't know that that's true elsewhere either, just, again, my school district experience. And in terms of, like I said, in response to Danny's comment, we will look into the, what I think is critical thinking agenda.
Critical literacy.
I know, but that's why I think the language matters. So I want to look at what it's being called and what the framework is. But that as a skill set, let's name critical thinking. I think we all agree that that's important for children to learn. So depending on, I understand the concern and fear that you're expressing. So let us dig into that a little bit more. There is a process for professional learning to take place, and we have supervisors that lead that professional learning, but we also have teacher leaders. It really often takes a village to operationalize training across 800 to 1,500 staff member on a given day. So I'm just giving you a big picture scope because I think that's what you asked for. I'm trying to demystify like the work, and that's sort of operationally how it evolves. I don't know if Scott wanted to add anything else, but like I said, we will look into the concern at the moment and share back.
And I mean, words do matter, so I get it. It's not just semantics. Critical thinking is important.
Right.
When you research, and you can't, trust everything on Google, right? So that's the whole thing. But like when you research, it really does come up as critical literacy and then critical consciousness. And then you start looking at what people are writing about, and then it gets deeper and deeper. And so it really does matter which one you're talking about. So I'm totally interested in hearing, like, who decides the professional learning? How do admins figure out what they are teaching? Who vets the resources? Things like that. So
we employ supervisors to determine and work with teachers on what's needed and what our curricular needs are at the moment. The current session has the language critical thinking in there. I do want to recognize, like, when diversity, equity, and inclusion was brought up, and DEI, and then words take on a different light and go in a different direction. We try to break those letters apart. Diversity is not something you believe in. You don't have a choice. Equity is what we believe in. It's a board policy. Inclusion, I hope you believe in. So what's at heart here is certainly, like, I don't want to diminish what your concern is. Anti-Semitism is real. We understand that. We understand the dynamics and how that's on the rise. It's something we recognize and are partners with you in. We don't want anti-Semitism in our schools. But we don't stay away from diversity, equity, and inclusion issues because there's people that do things and make choices that aren't in the right realm with that. Similar with thinking critically over text. That's something we should do in schools that our teachers are involved in. So if you have specific concerns on what would be happening Tuesday, reach out to Mr. Gingrich so he can share like the heart of that if he's available before then. But as someone who's very vested in raising healthy kids and not promoting anti-Semitism in any way, to Ms. Kalish's point earlier, that's something I trust and have the full interest in. Mr. Gingrich leading work with current teachers that are in our district in using diverse text to have different perspectives so kids could be independent thinkers, develop, not indoctrination, to your point.
Oh, of course. I don't think anyone wants indoctrination. I think that's the point of it, and we want diversity. Life is diverse. That while you're making sure to include many, when you're hearing across the board that a community doesn't feel included, it's also nice to just hear those words, so it doesn't mean people shouldn't be teaching all that. It's just, was this planned a year ago? Is this something newer? Like, when did this come into place? Critical thinking is really important, but I guess what came to light is potentially a red flag to something. Is this exactly the program that everyone thought it was? Is there more to it? It's not trusting necessarily a supervisor, an advisor, or a teacher. Maybe it's not exactly the program everybody thought it was. I don't know yet because it's something I didn't even know about I started researching it, and there are some flags that seem questionable. So, and because other schools that have used it and have used very similar programs, there's been a lot of issues with it. So I think that's what we're looking at. When was it even decided? So, and can community be more a part of it? Is there a partnership with parents? Can they be more involved? I don't expect these answers right away, but something to think about it respectfully, So I think those are the questions or points.
Well, we thank you for your questions and we'll definitely be in touch. Thanks. Okay, online?
Okay, hopefully I can get through this.
Okay.
The first comment is from John Bellis of Wynwood, as a parent at Penwyn Elementary. He is writing about wait until 8th, a free voluntary pledge about delaying smartphone until 8th grade. How do we get the board to promote this? In Thursday email, HSA communication, and other ways. Everyone seems to agree it's a good idea, but they say the board needs to approve. This is for parents who want to go beyond off and away, not asking for a change to school policy, just want to build awareness of this national organization so parents can decide if it's for them. It's good for students, good for teachers, free, voluntary, and can really make a difference.
Okay.
I have to get through the ones that we read on specific topics, so bear with me.
Well, I'll just answer, this one, we don't have an answer for you right now, but we can look into this a little bit more. I think this is true.
Kim Lippitz of Narberth, can you please let us know when school board votes on president and vice president of school board for upcoming year? Is there any feedback from community in that process, or is it done privately amongst school board directors? Given the many acting members of the administration, I would hope that the school board leadership remains consistent.
I can answer that.
There's the board reorganization meeting is the first Monday of every December by state law. And so ours will be December 2nd in this room. And that is a public vote, and there is opportunity for public comment before both, there is not?
That is a strictly school board decision.
Okay, there is
Yeah.
opportunity for public comment at that meeting, but not on the election of the board.
I believe there's no public comment in that meeting.
There has been in the past.
At
the
reorg
reorg
meeting, there's public comment limited to election of officers.
Got it.
Yes,
But it's typically a school board decision, not a public decision.
yes, yes, it is a decision made, but each individual board member gets one vote on who they would like to elect to leadership positions. But I believe there is an opportunity for public comment on the officers. If somebody from the public says, I really want X board member to be the president, or if there's a nomination and they can say, I think this person would do a great job.
Yes, there is. Meetings called to order, public comment on election of officers, vote on officers, and it is
Same as
totally a school board decision.
But there's always a way to comment to the board through our individual emails and community comments. That's another way.
The next comment is from Michelle McGill of Bala. Excuse me. When will the up-to-date data for PSSAs and Keystone results be available?
We're presenting that in following the reorg meeting. December 2nd.
Curriculum first and then
Is it-
board.
Sorry.
Sorry, just the format of presenting the data was usually curriculum first and then board. Is that correct?
Correct. Is that, you mean in terms of that day?
No. When we present the data to the public, it first is presented in a curriculum meeting.
Correct.
And that's why I'm just saying there's
Yes.
two opportunities technically, because you see it first in curriculum, and then typically curriculum asks a million questions. And then the data is usually, those questions are added, and then it goes to the board for a fuller presentation. Right?
Yes, yes.
And if you're interested in that and the board reorganization meeting, we are moving the November CCOB meeting to happen after the December 2nd reorganization meeting. So if you want, you can get a quick hit of two school board meetings, one right after the other on December 2nd in this room.
A comment from Kara Herman from the Committee for Special Education. Thanks for the opportunity to continue ongoing conversations with CSE. We have been meeting with Megan Schaefer and others at the district on a regular basis. Jill Altschuler from Marion Station. I'm wondering what the status is of the Wellness Council. I haven't heard of any meetings yet. Sarah Lowe, I don't have a town on that. Would you like me to read it nonetheless, or no?
Her kids are in Gladwin and middle school and high school.
Okay.
Okay. Following up on Ms. Vezel's question, since the skyrocketing rates of anti-Semitism following the massacre of October 7th and the anti-Semitic propaganda that followed it, what type of anti-Semitism training has been done in the district specifically, and what is the timeline and specific activities that are being planned beginning this November?
That one was already covered in our discussion.
Janice Lipsitz of Marion Station. Yesterday, this outrageous story was released, and it suggests that anti-Semitism training should be elevated. There's a link which we can share when we share the chat with the board. Risa Murphy of Bryn Mawr, is there a reason there is sometimes a 3-minute limit on speakers and sometimes there is not? People shouldn't be able to badger the board like the current speaker. Kim Lippitz of Narberth, can you please tell us what trainings are mandatory for staff and school board since anti-Semitism training clearly is not a priority? This frankly shocking to hear. Crystal Goodwin of Ardmore, will we assess the list of training that's needed? There are multiple training sessions that the district leaders, teachers, and students would benefit from. Michelle McGill of Bala Cynwyd, It is very interesting to me that people who are questioning DEI and equity work are making a request for anti-Semitism training. I urge the district to make sure they are considering all students when making decisions for the district, especially when considering the data released to educational gaps. Do not allow the current anti-DEI trend to sway programs being implemented to close achievement gaps. Please keep in mind that we can address both equity-related issues and anti-Semitism simultaneously, as both of these subjects need immediate attention. Follow the data. Another comment from Ms. Lowe. We have vetted agencies that have offered to provide free anti-Semitism training to the school district. What are the barriers to that happening? The Jewish community feels strongly that this is an urgent matter that cannot be delayed any further. If the district professes to abide by DEIB, it is, in a word, unconscionable to ignore the needs of Jewish students who are facing an onslaught of bigotry and Jew hatred when anti-Semitic events are happening at every level of the district and are not being appropriately documented. Daphne Ofer of Bala-Cynwyd, I wanted to refer to what Michelle Vassal asked and the reply about interfaith group. I do not see that as a substitute for anti-Semitism training. What interfaith group is involved in that? How come other training can be made mandatory, such as microaggression and anti-racism and LGBTQ issues and others, while anti-Semitism isn't? It's an urgent matter viewing the horrific anti-Semitism going on around the country. I also wanted to comment regarding Danny Shaw's comment about the upcoming in-service for teachers. How are teachers able to bring professional development to in-service days without being approved by the board, given the state of radical indoctrination taking place in universities and K-12 schools across the country? Referring to the video and article that Danny shared with the board. Jelani Wilson of Ardmore, sorry. This description of critical literacy is alarmist, incorrect, and an apology for racism. Critical literacy is a learning approach where students are expected to examine various texts to understand the relationship between language and the power it can hold. Students critically analyze and evaluate the meaning of texts as they relate to topics on equity, power, and social justice. The only people who oppose this are the same people who oppose DEI and who want to maintain their own privilege. This diatribe is deplorable because this is a point of view that is critical for a diversity of viewpoints. Despite proclamations of the opposite, trying to stop students from learning about critical literacy is about preventing diversity of viewpoints. Risa Murphy, I believe she was from Bryn Mawr, said, well said, Shana. Ms. Altschuler from Marion Station said it might not be the intentional approach. This is complete ignorance and disrespect to not accept what Danny is saying and invite the discussion. Crystal Goodwin of Ardmore, I'm not sure if I read that earlier, I'm sorry. Ms. Altschuler from Marion Station, you can disagree, but you have the responsibility as a board member to have dialogue with parents and community members and not allowed your opinion to supersede others. Kim Lipitz of Narberth, do you know what's in training on Tuesday? Shana said it's an equity thing. I'm confused. Laran Agiv, don't have a town, but I'll just keep going. I don't think Danny is insinuation that there are any wrongdoing planned to be presented on Tuesday. She's asking to see what will be taught in advance, only because there has been seeing lots of troublesome occurrences on this topic in other school districts across the country. Lori Lowenthal Marcus, no town in the district. Will the training on Tuesday be postponed? Jelani Wilson, refusing to look at white supremacy too closely is why we have an achievement gap. Kim Lipitz of Narberth, can parents attend the teacher training Tuesday for staff? Daphne Ofer of Bala-Cynwyd replying to Shayna's reply to Danny Shaw's comment about the indoctrination. I think it is very naive to say we do not indoctrinate our kids in schools. You will be surprised how much we do, and while it may seem, quote, dressed as legitimate training, this may well be an underground small steps forward to further plant this oppressor-oppressed theme. This is dangerous and should be eliminated before we are at a situation like is now happening in California. Ms. Lowe, some members of the board apparently haven't done the trainings on unconscious bias. Any of us are subject to unconscious biases, even against Jews, even if one is Jewish. The Tuesday session is potentially dangerous to members of our community, and an unwillingness to learn and share more about the session before moving ahead with it ahead is unacceptable. We should be grateful that a member of the community brought it to your attention before you allowed a controversial training that will potentially increase hatred in the school district. Tally Reiner Brodetsky from Penn Valley, we have been asking to prioritize current anti-Semitism education for over a year now. Anti-Semitism is currently at an all-time high in the U.S. Specifically in our district, our Jewish kids have been experiencing anti-Semitism from their peers and a lack of understanding from their teachers. When will this be prioritized? Sorry, Crystal Goodwin of Ardmore, again, will there be a list of training and other topics that the entire community can weigh in on and not allow one group say what is more important or not, i.e. anti-Semitism is not most important? Risa Murphy from Bryn Mawr, I really think that the 3-minute rule should be implemented across all meetings. It's not fair that only the heavily attended meetings get policed, and these community speakers do not represent the community as a whole. Kim Lippitz of Narberth, please understand how alarming it is to hear about staff training Tuesday on said topic, but zero anti-Semitism training. This feels terrible and does not feel the district takes anti-Semitism issues seriously. It's insane. It's well over a year. Ms. Lowe notes that she is from Villanova. My question about anti-Semitism training has not been answered. We were informed that anti-Semitism training has been started. What has been done thus far? And that is the end of the community comments.
Do we know anything about the care committee? That was one of the questions. No, sorry, not the care, Wellness Council.
Yes, we're looking to start that back up, and I think along the lines of what one of the other community members raised around wait until 8th, that was something that Wellness Committee had begun work on, so I think that would be a nice tie-in to make a recommendation back to the board as well, so we are in process.
And I believe the other stuff we've covered with our discussion in the thing about anti-Semitism training is definitely on it's part of the future. And and for Tuesday's thing we'll get back to you with information. Okay. And is there anything else? Did you hear? Okay, are we good to end this meeting? I think, no, it looks like, is there a date? It's not.
It's typically scheduled when the committee's identified. It will likely continue to be Fridays, but with the committee's input, we can decide on time and stuff like that.
So wait to hear when the next meeting will be in January. Okay, thank you, everybody who attended. Thanks.